So this is a new section to the Human Things podcast. And I brought on my friend, Megan Almon from Life Training Institute, somebody that I have worked with for almost a decade at LTI. And I know privately and personally when we talked has a deep interest in the discussion about beauty and art and what it means to us as human beings. So this is really a big deal for you, Megan. You were the first guest ever on Human Things podcast. I mean, you've got to feel really good about that right now, right? This is a special moment for you. You know, like 100 years from now, this is going to be the answer to a Trivial Pursuit game or whatever passes for Trivial Pursuit and the transhumanist hell that we have made by then for society. But, you know, this is groundbreaking, really, the first moment. So thank you for coming on.
Oh, it's my honor. And since I was probably the first fan of Human Things.
Yes, and almost the only fan of Human Things.
Well, we had this conversation because you stole my potential title that I was dreaming about. So, but I'm not that.
I was like a pit bull on that phrase. Like when I saw that C.S. Lewis video making rounds and it said, "Let us be found doing human things."
Yeah.
I mean, I was like, I am stealing it. And I was like Chris Pratt on Parks and Rec. I was like, I call band name, right? Like right there. I call podcast name. I got it.
Yep.
So,
well, I'm honored to be on.
So let's act like we're serious for a moment. Okay. So what I wanted to bring you on to talk about was this subject is beauty, right? The human thing that we're doing today is talking about creating beauty, admiring beauty, just the role that beauty plays in our lives, art, music, novels, all the different ways that we experience it in the world around us. And so what I wanted to talk with you about as somebody of a comrade in arms out there talking about the value of human life, as we reflect on it personally, and at this moment, especially during the coronavirus, does beauty communicate something more than just that moment of appreciation? How does it contribute to how we think about human beings and what it means to be a human being? And more importantly to me too, how does it communicate that there's something more, or even does it communicate that there's something more to this world than just the things that we see out there? So, you know, no big deal. Just answer that for me. Go ahead.
Just all that.
Just all that. Just the mysteries of the universe. Knock yourself out.
Well, it is a mystery of the universe. And one of my favorite philosophers in the whole world is Peter Kraft. And when I hear him talk about beauty on this particular thing about mystery, he talks about the French philosopher Gabriel Marcel, who's one of his favorite philosophers, who talks about that very thing, that somehow beauty is one of these great mysteries that philosophers love to kind of dedicate their lives to. Yeah. Kind of like questions of why are we good? Why are we evil? What does it mean to live well? You know, these types of things. Because you never really reach the end of those types of mysteries. And I think when it comes to beauty, part of the mystery is that we are it in a sense. There's a beauty to being human such that because we are, let me search for Christ's kind of explanation. Because God is this kind of supreme subject, like he's the ultimate of personalities, right? Mm-hmm. He is beautiful. And so everything that's beautiful comes from him. We can talk about that kind of transcendent source and why that's important and all of that in a bit. But because he's this supreme subject, he can't really step outside of himself and objectify the thing that he's studying. So similarly, we are subjects. We are made in his image. He miraculously made beings who aren't just being, we're persons with bodies and location and all of that. And similarly, we can't step outside of ourselves and fully objectify ourselves in order to study ourselves. So there's always going to be this little bit of mystery about beauty because it's really wrapped up in what we are and who we are.
Yeah, Roger Scruton talked about too in his book, the little short introduction to beauty. Mm-hmm. He talks about this idea of being disinterested. And that's what makes beauty different from other feelings. So he doesn't mean uninterested. What he means is that we admire beauty without any interest invested in the object of beauty. And to say that as clear as possible, he said, if you're happy and enjoying watching your kids play, there's an emotional investment in the lives of those kids, right? There's some connection there. Or if you're happy or enjoying the fruits of something that you're intaking, or some success at work, and all of these things, we're interested. We have vested interest in the object that's bringing us joy. He said that beauty, though, when we're admiring something as a work of art or as just beautiful for its own sake, we're disinterested. And what he means is that it is a moment where we enjoy something for the sake of that thing. That thing is beautiful. It does nothing for me. It doesn't offer me anything. It doesn't in any way advance my interest in this world. But at the same time, I can just stop and stare at it. And that's weird, right?
Yeah.
Because that's one of the things Scruton says. We're the only animal that does this on Earth. We're the only ones that are tied into it. And we have been from the beginning, right? As soon as you can find human civilizations, you find us making beautiful things, making art.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I wonder about even those cave drawings and things, like people really try to over explain maybe what was going on. And sometimes I wonder if they're just drawing it for the sake of, they saw this creature and it was so wonderful. They had to do their best to just reproduce it. It was art. It was the first type of art. And even the ancients thought about beauty in that way. They knew there was something about it that caused, like, they knew that it was something that you know when you see. It was more than just I'm just going to explain and wrap my head around all of this, because they were understanding it in terms of what it did to them. Plato was one of those. I think about Plotinus and the way he talked about beauty. He talked about it being kind of this out of body experience. Like the same kind of thing that Scruton was saying, this kind of disinterested, because you're not focused on yourself at all.
Yeah.
So it is it's like stepping outside of yourself for a moment. And I think everyone listening or watching is probably in some way experienced something like that. When you encounter something in the world, whether it's a piece of music, I can remember seeing for the first time in an art class in college, the Bernini sculpture. It's called The Ecstasy of Saint Teresa. And it's absolutely this beautiful sculpture, but I remember just looking at it, and this was on a screen, like on a projector screen.
Yeah.
And having one of those experiences where you're like, I'm not sure I'm going to get back in my body.
I've done that at the High Museum, where I've stood in front of a work of art just forever. There's a sculpture, and there's a similar sculpture in the movie Pride and Prejudice. There's a sculpture at the High Museum where it's a veiled woman, right? And somehow the artist has made the veil look so fragile, right? I mean, it's sculpted, it's marble, and yet something about the veil, I've just sat there and stared at it and wonder. And like you said, I'm out, right? It's no longer has anything to do with me or my life or any utility. And going back to, I think that you said something funny about the cave drawings, as people wonder why people made those drawings. I wonder why they wonder. I mean, as I'm talking, I know I'm painfully aware that one of my kids' artwork things is on the wall behind me. And I remember being a kid, and even now, sometimes you just draw, right? I mean, sometimes our creativity is a part of the image bearer of God, but the ultimate creator, the ultimate maker and sustainer of all things. His nature was creative, and he birthed all of this. And so we bear that mark, and you see it in us as a differentiation from us. Going back to those cave drawings, I think G.K. Chesterton, the Everlasting Man, said, one of the differences between us and all the other animals on this planet is that if you look back to the very first moments that we exist as a society, as we start to come together as communities, there's evidence of us drawing and expressing ourselves and putting paintings on the walls and creating art. And as long as we've been here, no other animal does it at all. They just have no interest in it in the same way. So it is mysterious, but here's where the mystery gets even weirder, right? Because the discussion of it, not just as art and like that thing on the wall behind me, which is beautiful to me because my kids did it, but I don't think the rest of the world would look at it and would be in awe of it. But objective art, right? I mean, we've all heard, and I think more people today, when I talk to them than don't, make claims like beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah.
And then use that in a sense to relativize art altogether. Where I think Roger Scruton pushes back on his very short introduction. He says one of the a priori things that we can consider about art when we're wrestling with beauty is that everyone would accept the idea that some things are more beautiful than others. And that runs up against that idea that beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, that's kind of the motto of today, that beauty is this entirely subjective thing, that it's all a matter of preference or personal taste.
Yeah.
And I just, that bugs me, because we all, like, when you encounter beauty, and even back to Plotinus, he talked about it in such a way, he said, you recognize it.
Yeah.
You remember something. And I love that he says recognize, because he doesn't say you cognize it.
Yeah.
He says you recognize, there's something there that reminds you of something you know. And you don't really know why you know it, but you know it. It kind of sneaks past all your defenses and captivates. And we don't have a full understanding. Again, that mystery is there. But if we're going to say beauty is just in the eye of the beholder, and we make it this entirely subjective thing, then we make it something that's not even real.
Yeah. Yeah. And that idea of we're recognizing something about it, right? That it is, when we see something truly and objectively beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's a way here, which it's like talking about objective moral values, right? I mean, I was just recently having a conversation with a young guy who was struggling with the idea that objective moral values exist.
Yeah.
Even though, as we went through and talked about, there's aspects of it that are difficult to understand. But then there's another part that we bump up against, which is that we see them and experience them all the time in our life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think, the same thing here. The idea that one of the first things my wife and I started doing when we were in shelter in place was we started taking walks around our neighborhood.
Yeah.
And my wife said, it's remarkable how beautiful our neighborhood is, right? The walk isn't just about health, which it is about, but there's also something for her that as we walk, we're experiencing. Georgia's a very green state. I mean, if you've never been to Georgia and spent time here, particularly in the summer and the spring, I don't think you really fully understand what green is. I mean, we have so many different, it's just everywhere. Everything is green all the time. And in the midst of all that greenness, there's rabbits jumping around in our neighborhood and raptors of all sorts, these huge hawks that fly over, and owls perched up. And we live in an old neighborhood with these very big established hardwood trees all around us. And the experience is beautiful. And to the point that when we went out one day and a lot of people were doing yard work, and I said, isn't it great to see everybody out working in their yard? And my wife said, yeah, it's great, but it's disrupting the beauty a little bit when you hear the background noise, right? I mean, there's something about it. And so we recognize something real about it. This is beautiful.
Yeah, I think my go-to for that is C.S. Lewis, which, who doesn't go to C.S. Lewis, right? But it's
just uniquely you. Who is this C.S. Lewis guy? I've never heard of him in Christian circles.
He's some guy. No, I think a lot of people would go to The Weight of Glory and things like that, which has, could we talk about it there? This idea of wanting to just be absorbed into it, which is kind of what it does to us. But I go to, in talking about the objectivity of beauty, I think about when he wrote in The Abolition of Man, which is not a work particularly about beauty, but a work about the objectivity of values. Like, we can't lose that. We can't just toss it aside. And in the first chapter of that book, he's talking about the way these writers in this child's, I think it was like a language arts book or something, for like a school book for children. And he was editing it and all that kind of stuff. But then he got to some language that bothered him, because it wasn't the teaching of the language arts that was bothering him, or whatever subject it was the way that they were teaching other things about how values are subjective that was dangerous. Yeah. And so he had this little exchange in the book about two men talking about a cataract or a waterfall. And one of the men described the waterfall as sublime, which is similar to beautiful. This is fantastic. And the other one said it was pretty. And the writer of the book kind of criticized the guy who called it sublime, and kind of reduced what he was talking about just to his feelings. So here we have a situation, the guy's looking at a waterfall, he says, this is sublime. And the writer of this book says, oh, he's just talking about his feelings, his personal preferences. And Lewis jumped all over that. And he said, no, he's not. He can't be talking about his personal feeling. His feelings aren't sublime. The only way to get this situation right, the only way to look at it is if a man is looking at a waterfall and describes it as sublime, if the statement is about his feelings would have to be the exact opposite.
Yeah.
The reason the waterfall is really sublime is because it humbled him. He was having humble feelings, not sublime feelings. So point of this whole thing is that Lewis is saying the sublimity that, or we could say the beauty of this thing was really there. It's a real attribute of the waterfall. It's not just reduced to our feelings about the waterfall, because our feelings have to be an exact opposite to recognize what's going on.
Yeah, and in the same way, when we talk about objective moral values, I would say there's a testimony of the world to the beautiful things in it, right? Because it's not to say that just like our moral senses can be corrupted, our aesthetic senses can be corrupted. There are things that we can we can diminish beauty intentionally in a sense of elevating irony so that we can diminish beauty. And I've done stupid things like that. Like if you show a video of somebody making bacon and I say, isn't it beautiful? I don't really mean that, right? I mean, I don't really see beauty in the frying of bacon. I'm just being a jerk or whatever at that moment. But it does diminish, right? I mean, that sort of that ironic culture that we live in is bringing beauty down. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a tearing things down. One of the things that I have said to other people personally and conversationally is that I think that we as a culture have lost creativity. And so all that's left is to corrupt the beautiful and to corrupt the institutions that have carried society. And I think a great illustration of this dumbing down of our ability to create and to just attacking the things that came before us institutionally would be just think of all the dumb movies that are out. Bad Mom, Bad Teacher, Bad Santa, TV show, Bad Judge, Bad Grandpa. And those are just a list of the things where we take these beautiful institutions that have existed and that have been the backbone of society and we just tear them apart. And we do the same thing with art, right? And when we can't make new things, all we do is we mock old things. We bring up a new thing and we mock something and bring it down to our level. To some degree or another, we're losing a sense of that elevation of true art, that idea that there are truly beautiful things, and some things are more beautiful than others. But here's the thing, when I say that the world testifies to true beauty, whatever broken cultures become broken in their aesthetics, however that happens, what we do see is over a long enough time, the really beautiful things survive. Yeah. Right? The history is vicious. I mean, in the sense of that most of us are aggressively forgotten and wiped from the pages of history. Even our own families don't remember us a couple of generations from now. Yeah. But then some piece of art that maybe even something like when you talk about something like Van Gogh, who during his time, people didn't appreciate him at all. Mm-mm. But there's something beautiful there. And we value, it survived, right? We couldn't let it go. I talk about that with people as well. We couldn't let it go. We had to hold on to it. And so history and people will testify to true beauty in a way that this dismissive, ironic, and relativistic culture doesn't.
Yeah. I have a professor of mine, John Mark Reynolds, and I remember him saying in class, history has a way of shaking out the things that really matter. Yeah. And I love that saying. It's just like what you're talking about. But yes, I've noticed that if you are a student of history, and so many aren't really, and maybe that's part of that has to be a facet of the problem. When we look at the way that things have changed on down the line, and of course you and I would definitely say ideas have consequences, and the ways that these ideas have passed down and trickled down has affected where we are. It wasn't that the ancients looked around and didn't see the brokenness of the world. If anything, they looked around and felt it more than we do. I mean, we have all these, what would Pascal would call them diversions, all these distractions, abilities to numb pain that they didn't have. And they turned to the beautiful as a way of coping with that, as a way of expressing there's something more, there's something better. There's so much to live for, even in the midst of all this brokenness. And then we look at what's happened to that. Like I was asking students the other day, because I was giving a talk like this one, to a group, and I was asking them real quick for just some rapid feedback, because on these online platforms, you want them to be engaged. But I asked them, what do you think of right off the top of your head when I say the word beauty? And it was interesting to see their answers. Now, some of them have been, formed by the church and formed by great traditions. So they would say things like nature, or human beings, the human face. They're kind of more on the right track than some others. But if you Google beauty right now, like if you just put the word beauty into your Google search engine, I've done it, and I guarantee what will come up is, it's not that dangerous, but
I was gonna say, uh-oh.
But I did, as an experiment, and what came up is just, you could scroll and scroll and scroll, and what you would see are images of a particular kind of woman's face and advertisements for cosmetics. Just page after page after page after page.
Yeah.
That's what comes up. So what we have is, back to my story though, I asked those students, what do you think the answer would have been if we had asked Da Vinci that question? Because the air that he breathed in his culture was so different than the air that we breathe. Back to Peter Kraft, he would say, we've taken beauty and shoved it away in museums, and we build strip malls instead of, why don't we live in the museums and shove the ugly stuff away?
Yeah.
It's just so reverse of what it used to be. And it is true that the artists now, I think in large part because of the ideas that have trickled down and their reaction to it, have started to make art that is more to shock, or to kind of make things more interesting, or to provoke, or to disturb. I wonder sometimes if that's a reaction to all that's happened. But I think both ways are ways of dealing with all the broken that's going on. And I think I was thinking about this just the other day before that other lecture. And one of the things I came to is, because beauty has that effect, because it sneaks past all your defenses and just grabs hold of you in ways that other things can't. That's why it's such a necessary part of the human experience. It shapes our souls when we encounter beauty. Because it does that, I wonder that when people encounter beauty now, because encountering beauty isn't all pleasure here and now. And in fact, people who've really thought about it understand that it hurts. Beauty is pleasurable, but it's also painful and a little bit terrifying.
Yeah.
When you encounter true beauty. And I wonder sometimes in the culture that we live in, Roger Scruton said, this cult of ugliness, talking about the world of art, this cult of ugliness, one word is written large on all these ugly things, and that word is me. Because it's not about the disinterest or all about the other. It's become all about me. And I think when people encounter true beauty, it threatens that, because it really kind of dethrones you, and shows you how small you are in the significance of all that is. Which I think the Christian worldview has so much room for that as a good thing. But
yeah, there's a great moment too, and I've seen Warren Smith online talking about this. I think it's Warren Cole Smith from World Magazine talking about this on his Facebook page, that here's a scene in Ferris Bueller's Day Off that he loves, the museum scene.
Awesome.
He said that's just a beautiful scene, right? Where especially when Cameron is so absorbed into that piece of artwork until he sees that faceless figure in there and identifies it with what he's feeling, what he's sensing, and Andrew Peterson's book, Adorning the Dark, he talks about how, sometimes it's the songwriter's job to feel sad and to share that sadness, right? It's not just about joy or happiness. Sometimes the artist is sharing whatever is true and good and beautiful in what they're producing. And sometimes the end result of that isn't intended to make you feel great. Sometimes it's meant to shake you up. And I think there we get back to the original point that we were making, and that idea that we were made, as Christians, we believe we're the image bearers of God, created by him both for community and for purpose, and that we reflect him in some ways. And even that gets mysterious and difficult to discuss if we go too far into it. Yeah. But one of those evidences of something more is this sense to create beauty to me. Because as you and I conversationally talked about earlier, pregnancy is a weird thing, but it's a weird thing that's universally enjoyed throughout the human condition, right? Yeah. It's an odd relation. It's a unique and bizarre relationship between a mother and her child that goes on during that early part of development. And it's strange and it's hard to understand and it's hard to grasp all that's going on in that relationship between the two of them. And there's no analogy to it. I agree with philosophers that said there's nothing analogous to that weird relationship. But it's a weird relationship that every single human being on earth experiences, just like objective moral values. How we know them is weird, but it's even weirder is to try to imagine that the world doesn't have them, that things like rape and genocide aren't objectively wrong. That's far weirder to me than finding some way to reconcile myself to the idea that there are things that are truly good and things that are truly bad, and that I can know those things in some mysterious way that I'm not able to talk to people about. And that's where beauty is the same thing to me, right? We all have seen something beautiful. And just the fact that that aesthetic sense can be corrupted, or it can be diminished, or that we can cast it off and say everything's beautiful and be those fools at that museum that are gawking over a pair of eyeglasses that somebody intentionally put on the floor to make everybody look silly so they could gather around it and talk about the importance of it when it was just a pair of eyeglasses that somebody dropped on the floor. We can crush it down as a culture. We can become stupid and uncreative, but at the end of the day, we can't take away the universal human experience that there are beautiful things in this world, and some things that are so beautiful, like you said, that are scary and they're disruptive to our worldview. In a good way, they remind us of important things, bring us back. And for me, and I'm going to talk about this in a moment when you and I are done too, it leads to those moments when those are either darkest or happiest or most troubled. So much of that will have a soundtrack to it, or a vision of a painting, or we'll seek out some art to restore us back to community. We're not alone. Someone else has experienced this, felt this, and created something beautiful out of it.
Yeah, the artist, that's what the artist does. Dorothy Sayers, my hero, she talks about that in her essay on aesthetics. Andrew Peterson in his Wing Feather Saga, which my kids and I my whole family enjoyed that series of books, highly recommend it. But one of the lines that's repeated often in that book is from the mother figure Nia to her children when she says, remember who you are. Remember who you are. But I also think about even Shakespeare, who, I mean, hello, Shakespeare, who understood human nature, kind of like Jane Austen. We were talking about that in another conversation. People who
Charles
just
Dickens, another person.
Yes.
Yeah.
But in A Midsummer Night's Dream, where Shakespeare, Shakespeare's writing, but in the final kind of act of that book, where this king figure, who is set to marry Hippolyta, right? Theseus is set to marry Hippolyta, and Theseus throughout this whole play has been like not a lover of poetry. And in fact, at the beginning of Act 5, he lets us know why he's not. And it's the most poetic part of the whole play. Yep. It's so ironic. But what he says in that play is he talks about a local habitation. That's what the poet does. Like the poet's eye and fine frenzy rolling from earth to heaven, from heaven to earth. And what the pen does is give to these mysterious things a local habitation and a name. And that's what the artist does when they produce something. They give these mysterious these experiences you're talking about, a local habitation and a name. It's a picture of the incarnation.
Yeah,
it's what it is. When we create, we do something like that, and other people's recognize it when they encounter it. Which is why Flannery O'Connor, when somebody said, "Explain your story to me," and she's like, "I don't have to. Read the story. That is the experience."
That's what I want you to get out of it, right? Read the story.
Yes, just read the story. That's what art does. And
I like what you said earlier. It grabs us where we are.
Yeah.
It draws us out of ourselves.
Yeah.
It reminds us of our place in the community and the place in this world. And in that sense that we get to, in some pathetically small, mortal human way, participate in the creative act in the way that the ultimate creator made us to. Yeah. It's a small miracle.
It's a small miracle, and it's also a way that we fight back.
Oh, great.
Oh my God. I think about this particular time, just the fact that you and Tracy were walking in the neighborhood and enjoying the captivating beauty that was all around you, that Chesterton, like the world will never starve for want of wonders, but it will starve for want of wonder. Just taking the time to notice. But in doing that, it's a pushback to say, no, the world can be broken. It is broken, but it can't kill all of this. I tell a story to students about the cellist in Sarajevo, which was a real story that happened. A man named Vedran Smilovic was a Bosnian. He was part of the orchestra there in Sarajevo, which was a city of high arts. And back in the Bosnian War, when the city was under siege for like 4 years, it was being bombed every single day. Snipers taking out people in the streets. It was a horrendous thing from like 1992 to 1996. And the story goes that Vedran was in his apartment one day when there were people in the market square who were in line to buy food, just civilians. And a mortar was fired into that market square. And in a moment, it killed 22 men, women, and children. And in response to that horrendous thing, which was happening daily to them, but in response to that horrendous moment, Vedran did the only thing he could think of in response. He took his cello and he went and he sat in the crater as the debris and things were being cleared away, and he began to play his cello. He played a particular piece of music that I can't remember off the top, Adagio in G minor, each day in that spot, in the open, where snipers could have taken him out at any moment. And he did it for 22 consecutive days, 1 day for each victim. And what I know about that is that people looked on and they saw what he was doing, and it stopped them in their tracks. Because in the midst of all of this horror, this man it was his battle cry. It was his act of defiance. And he's the one who was saying, you can kill, and you can take, and you can maim, and you can break, but you cannot kill this. And what a wonderful, I get chills all over my body. I might cry thinking about it.
That right there is why you're my first guest. That story right there. That's it. Man, this has been great. I've enjoyed talking to you, Megan. I really appreciate you giving me your time to talk about this.
My pleasure.
And have a great day.
You too, Jay.